is such a pleasure to be here, and such a pleasure to be here on a glorious sunny day after yesterday's downpours. Also, if anybody here is a parent of small children, I've been able to pick up another couple of willies on my way up to the university, which is fantastic. We'll be collecting those all summer. If you don't know what I'm talking about, there are statues of a small Scottish character called Willie who are popping up all over Scotland, and it's a social media trend to take a photo of them. And my boys, my 5-year-old boy in particular, just loves this idea. So thank you to Dundee for that one. So I am here from the Carnegie UK Trust. I don't expect that many of you internationally to know us. We're a small independent organisation based in Dunfermline, which is just down the road from here. We have been working on concepts of well-being for well over 100 years. If you know anything about my organisation, you will know that we used to build libraries. So if anybody talks about the Carnegie UK Trust, they usually talk to me about, oh, I had a local library that was a Carnegie library. Now, over the years, we have done a lot more than libraries, and we've been involved in research, policy development and practice development on a range of emerging social policy issues. And the one that I'm going to talk to you about today is the emergence or the re-emergence of the value of kindness within our societies. I'm particularly pleased to be talking to you about it here in Dundee, because while this is a world conference, this work started in Scotland and was inspired by some thinking in Scotland, and particularly some research that the Joseph Rowntree Foundation had commissioned in Glasgow. So this has very local roots for us. But you probably know, in reaction to some of the negative trends that we were just hearing about, there has been an upsurge in interest in how we have a good society, how we all live together well. Words that you'll hear like flourishing come from roots of trying to understand what a good society is and what well-being is within that. So there are networks springing up around the UK. We fund the Better Way network that works out of London. There's a Good Help network, which Nesta have been involved in. We have our own contributions to the thought leadership side of it. We call it the enabling state. Other people call it the relational state. It's the idea of trying to move away from a transactional, top-down, one-size-fits-all model of public services to a model of public services that is much more co-produced and engaging. Some of you might know Hilary Cottam's work on radical help, which is in the same vein, which is about trying to find different ways of unlocking energy and potential in communities. And of course, the work that we've been doing with Julia Unwin, who was formerly the Chief Executive at Joseph Rowntree, who was working with us for a couple of years as a Carnegie Fellow. Now, if you signed up to this on the early agenda, you will have seen Julia's name and not mine, and she sends her apologies to you. She's on a restricted travel at the moment for health reasons, but she sends her very, very best. So we know there is something going on here about the re-emergence of values and of words like compassion, kindness, and caring. We find it helpful to break it down a little bit. So if you tweet, or if you're on social media or you're on Instagram and you plug in kindness, what you will get are a huge number of memes and quotes and urges to do something called random kindness. A random kindness is a fascinating social phenomenon. It is the desire to do something good for your fellow humans, but to do it in quite a low-risk way. So you don't need to know the person. It helps if you don't. You can buy them a coffee in somebody behind you in the queue. You can leave a bunch of flowers for somebody on a park bench. And that is a way of showing that you care and being connected to people around you. And we agree that is probably a good thing. It's probably a nice thing. It builds connection, but it doesn't really go far enough. There's no risk involved in it. There's no long-term relationship involved in it. You can move on quite quickly from that. We also know from the research that that does more for your well-being as the giver than it does for the person who receives it. So there is perhaps an altruistic egoism going on within that movement. So we think there's something more interesting in the community space around relational kindness and how people come together within communities to show that they care and how we can build on those aspects. And a lot of the work that we've been doing with something called the Kindness Innovation Network, which I'll say a bit more about later, and with partners in North Ayrshire, has been focused on how you build relational kindness and how you unlock it within communities. But the third area, and the area where there is less attention so far, but is a growing field, is what we would call radical kindness. And we borrowed that phrase from the original researchers at the University of Edinburgh, who I should give a shout out to and credit their work, because they've been incredibly helpful to us in understanding how this fits within the academic disciplines. But radical kindness is the idea that if kindness is about treating people as kin, as family, then radical kindness is about treating people who are not like us as if they were kin or family. And it asks us to be far more challenging about the structures that we put in place as a society to look after people who don't look or sound or feel like us, people who we're not connected to, who don't live on our street. And it calls into question how we structure a lot of our services and our provision to make sure that people do receive what they ought to receive and are treated with dignity, compassion and kindness when they receive services. So it's quite a challenging framework when you start moving into concepts of radical kindness. I'll tell you the two examples that we get consistently about examples of unkind systems. The first one was the Grenfell Tower and the tragedy involved in that, and the unkindness in a system that refused to listen to people who were in fear of their lives. That was an unkind system, and it had terrible consequences. The second one is the way that we structure social care in time blocks, the way that we pay people very low wages in order to look after the most vulnerable in our society, and then don't give them the time to build a relationship with the person that they're supposed to be caring for. That is an unkind system. And those unkind systems can only be changed by concepts of radical kindness. So Julia put a lot of time and effort into the concept of having two lexicons and the difference between the lexicon that is most common in public policy and in how we think about service delivery, the rational lexicon. So that's the one that you will be very, very familiar with. We'll talk about performance management, we'll talk about regulation and risk. We don't particularly like talking about people, so we'll give them a whole list of other names like clients and patients and consumers. So we're not talking about them as mothers and fathers and people who live next to us and our neighbours and so on. And there's also, of course, the relational lexicon, and the one where we talk about our family, we talk about our friends, we talk in powerful words about love, about being friends with each other. And what we think, Julia argues very coherently in her report, is that public policy finds it incredibly hard to talk in a relational lexicon. It has crowded all of that out. But we all know that people respond to the language of hope. They also respond to the language of fear. So we have to get better at connecting with people emotionally if we're going to tackle some of the big issues in society around populism and around inequality. And I should say that the argument in our work is not that this is an either or. We're not saying throw out all of the rational and replace it with the emotional. There are very, very good reasons why we have rationality and objectivity in the delivery of services. It's important that services are fair, that people receive what they are due regardless of the emotional connection with the person who's giving the service. But we also know that that exists now anyway. So if you are a middle-class white person like me, you'll get a really good health service. If you don't look or sound like me, you'll get a worse experience with your GP. We know that these things happen, and they happen across the board in public services. So by not acknowledging the human and the relational part, we're hiding part of what makes our public services work and what makes them unequal. So I wanted to give you some good news, because it's nice to have good news. And the good news is that we, as a society, are actually a lot kinder than you might think. We actually get on with each other. We look after our neighbours. We are helpful to each other. We're not brilliant at the old emotional literacy stuff, but this is a poll in the UK and Ireland, and maybe our international colleagues would understand that emotional literacy perhaps isn't our cultural bedrock. So we're working on that as a society. But underneath this, there are some other things that we have to think about. So we know that it's not a straightforward equation. It helps if you're white. It helps if you're middle class. It helps if you're older. So some of the people that we know who don't experience kindness in their communities are the same people that we would know are excluded in other parts of society. And that's an interesting pause for thought, because kindness is not only radical and relational, it's also contagious. So if we don't give kindness, then people won't pass it on. And we need to make sure that we're creating a society where we're all bonded and blended in that. So I mentioned we've been doing 2 programmes about what's happening really in the radical space. One of them is the Kindness Innovation Network, which is a group of 100 professionals and people from around Scotland who've been coming together looking at how they personally or their organisations can change to become kinder. And the other one is work that we've been doing on the ground in North Ayrshire. And in North Ayrshire, we've been working particularly in their fairness dimensions. If you know, they have a Fair for All programme in that council area, and they particularly see the connection that I was just talking about between kindness and inequalities and how we can unlock some of that. So we know that the squeeze on kindness is there from that work and from Julia's work. We know externally that there is rising demand, there's austerity, there's a toxic media narrative, toxic social media narrative, an audit culture that works against some of what we're trying to promote, and some hostility in the conversation around these aspects. Internally, we know that there are blame cultures that make people very risk averse. There is a scrutiny system that doesn't necessarily reward the things that we expect our public services to deliver. There are codes of professionalism that may say on the front line that we expect you to be kind or compassionate, and then spend the next 40 pages talking about how you should be professional. And we think perhaps the balance is slightly wrong on that one. And a management of risk that talks about the impact of things that we think that we can predict rather than looking at opportunity costs. And we know that's going to get worse because that cycle is going to get worse. So we need to do more to get in the way. I've just been told I have 2 minutes, so I will flash through this. I don't know whether the Minister yesterday spoke about the National Performance Framework. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Yeah. So in here, in the heart of it, is the word kindness. And we think this is incredibly important because it shows and it signals a government who are interested in putting some radical kindness back into system design. And we're delighted to be working with them on some of that. So we know some of the issues that people are facing around unwillingness to take risks, about that, the concept of organisational boundaries and barriers, a reluctance to let go of traditional performance management, something that happens in between, in the middle layer in public services. Fears of radical kindness, that somehow it'll become less fair than it currently is. And what do we think makes a difference from our work? Issues like turning the no culture into a why not culture. It's a phrase from one of our report authors, Zoe Ferguson. Creating places and spaces that have no agenda, that aren't there to be a breastfeeding club or a book club, but they are just because it's nice for people to come together and do whatever it is they want to do in that space. Trusting people that they can build their own relationships, and we don't always have to do that for them as professionals, but they do perhaps need some opportunities within that. And we have a whole strand on procurement for relationships, which is fascinating, but I won't go into it at this point. So if I conclude, my final thoughts are that when we're thinking about public services, we tend to think about this as intention. So there is a tension between fairness and kindness. It is a tension that already exists within how we deliver services. So we are surfacing something that already exists. Creating more kindness or more awareness of kindness doesn't bring a new problem into the system, it just recognises a problem that's already there. But at the moment, we locate that tension in an individual staff member, and we don't locate it within our bigger, broader policy narratives of, is this really who we want to be as a society? So my questions for you working in this field are very simple. Have we struck the right balance between fairness and kindness? And if not, is it really too late to make the change? Thank you.